So you run your startup. Have you thought about selling your company to another company? What will the experience will be like? Would you get rich? Would you enjoy it? How does it work? I feel like there's a lot of conversation about going public, IPO, yada yada yada, but there are not as many discussion about how to sell your companies and the experience of selling your company. So today I have two of my really good friends, Ivan and Nick. They each sold their company and now they're working in the company that acquired them. So we're going to go over their experiences. How does that really make sense? How do you negotiate deals? And most importantly, are they enjoying their lives as a person working for the acquirers? So let's get started. If you like the video, please subscribe. I'm just getting started, so that means a lot to me. Thank you.
I'm Ivan. I started a company about 6 years ago called Mayhem. And Mayhem was a consumer social products company. We basically built a bunch of different consumer products, mostly focused on gamers. Think like a Twitch or a Discord, where we built consumer products for people that play games, but not games themselves or not like the underlying infrastructure or platform. Worked on the company for 4 years. In that time period, we probably shipped 2 primary products that were successful and tried to ship half a dozen to a dozen different products in that time. So a lot of experience just iterating on consumer products and what that means and how that works, and then ultimately what an exit for a consumer product looks like. When we started, the default was really, if you were going to build a consumer product, success means you have to hit some level of scale. And scale means you have to invest pretty heavily ahead of seeing any money coming in through the door, which means you're going at it from a venture perspective right away. So we started, just my co-founder and I, building a lot of different products that we would use that we were excited about as customers, as users of the product. Ended up kind of finding some use cases around helping players play competitive PC games better. That's one of the underlying problems we wanted to solve, and ended up going out and raising venture funding pretty early, actually, in the life cycle of the company. And back then we raised what would be called a pre-seed round, which is just $1 million. I say just because today the rounds are ballooned and a lot bigger. And over the course of building the company, raised at least 1 or 2 institutional rounds. Yeah, started out, knew that would be the path, at least for us when we were building. We ended up raising about six to 7 million.
I'm Nick Elledge, and I co-founded Data Fleets, which really focused on data access. So the core thesis was that there's all this data that we can use for data-hungry models and analytics and training, very similar to what we're seeing now with really the revolution in large language models, GPT. But all this data is locked away due to different constraints. It's owned by different people or subject to different privacy constraints. And the thesis of Data Fleets is really trying to unlock that, to make it useful in the world while still respecting the constraints, the ownership, the privacy of that underlying information, but being able to make it useful. And we use that in healthcare. We use that in financial services. So in healthcare, for example, we used it for COVID-19 medical research, where institutions were able to research on sensitive patient information in the middle of the pandemic to be able to fight it better and produce insights that led to research breakthroughs. Same thing with financial services, unlocking financial transaction data, which is sensitive and private at financial institutions, to be able to better combat fraud. So these are just a few examples of where the software was used. And we were acquired in 2021 by LiveRamp. Yeah, it was fairly similar for us. We raised about 5 million in total. The first money in the company was mine and my co-founders in order to just pay some of the bills. And that's a little nerve-wracking to write a check into your own company and start spending off of it. It's nerve-wracking thereafter to take money from friends and family who you trust and you want to deliver a good return to and hope that you can help them. And then you start spending their money. And then we got finally to the institutions. And in the prior, call it 10 years before founding Data Fleets, I had been a lead investor in startups. I had sat on the board of startups. I had, as a McKinsey consultant, helped large companies acquire startups. So I had really seen almost every angle of this, and I knew a lot of folks, a lot of friends from Stanford or VCs. So I felt like those conversations were pretty natural, and getting those early meetings was easy because of the reputation I built over the years. However, then we went out to raise in March of 2020. And if you remember what the world was like then, as the pandemic started to really bite in the stock market and started to take off. That was probably the worst month we possibly could have gone out to try to raise capital. And that was a very interesting experience. Eventually, we got the round over the line, but it took far longer than it really should have because of the Sequoia memo with RIP good times. And everyone was really freaking out. All of a sudden, my calendar went from being all in-person meetings in Palo Alto to just flipping to Zoom meetings all in 1 week, as everyone just went all remote within a week of each other during March. So that was a challenging experience to try to raise in the middle of that. And in the end, those folks got a great return on data fleets. Good for the folks that did invest.
So it sounds like you guys closed your seed round. You decided to get acquired. So what was the situation like? Were you trying to raise a new round of financing? You got the offer? Or was it something like totally unexpected?
Typically, a startup is acquired around the time of a financing because you either decide I'm going to take more capital and keep going, or we're going to go ahead and sell it now, because the cash on your balance sheet as a startup is not that important when you're getting acquired. However, we were approached by our acquirer shortly after our seed round. And some of the announcement that we did in TechCrunch and other publications, and some of the very A-list investors that we had signaled that we were onto something potentially and drew some of the attention from the acquirer. And then that was a nice position for us to be in because we knew that we weren't about to run out of money anytime soon, and we could keep the conversation going really with them as long as we needed to. So that was a nice position to be in. They reached out to us via email in August of that year of 2020, and then they wanted to do a proof of concept, which we did in September, October, November, and then I think we got the first term sheet in December, or maybe in November or December, and then we said no a couple times, and then finally in January we said yes.
Got it. Okay, makes sense.
So it's about 6 months-ish.
And I think it's actually this kind of confluence of startups go through, it's a wave, right? Where at different points of the company's life, you're at like a local maximum. Usually as a founder, you want to raise when you're at a local maximum, or you want to have a transaction of some sort when you're at local maximum. You don't do it when your growth is slowing or whatever the case is. In our case, I think we had launched a product pretty recently that was doing well. And the idea behind the product was we would help gamers actually play together and organize large scale events. And these events could be a tournament, they could be a league, you name it. And our idea was effectively to build a community product around these kind of large scale organizations or these large scale ways that people play together. And we were seeing a lot of success and traction with fairly competitive gamers. So if you think of Fortnite, Apex Legends, they're these pretty competitive multiplayer PC games. We probably owned, in terms of market share, the top everyone in the top 1% of people that played Fortnite was using our product at the time, which was a significant kind of number. It was like a very important and valuable cohort of users. And we were thinking about how do we expand beyond that and move down the market to more casual players. And at that time, this was about 2 years after we had raised our most recent round, which is about 5 million. We still had a lot of money in the bank. We were looking at this opportunity to expand, and we had interest from various companies in this space over the course of a year before we had actually entered into kind of any conversations. And we'd always said no. We were like, look, we have tons of capital still. We're really excited about what we're building. And usually it was, and you'll get this a lot, I think, if you're on something as a founder, is like very loose interest, whether it's like the corp dev team or just like people poking at you. And the general advice is to ignore that. You can say hi, you can build a relationship, but you don't want to get distracted. So that's what we did. It wasn't until we had this confluence of two interested parties being more aggressive about their interests, and at the same time, us thinking about, is this like the right time to potentially go out and catalyze the process and raise as well? Just feeling like we were at a local maximum, I guess is a way to say it, right? We had a product that was working, we had a story around expanding, we had a highly retentive early user base. And like for a consumer product, you can't really get better than that. It's the consumer is so hard and fickle that you really need there's an art to figuring out when the right time is to raise, when the right story is to tell. And I think we were at that right point. When we had hit that point and those two companies had reached out, we felt like that was the right time to respond back and be like, hey, let's actually have a conversation about it. And we responded by saying, hey, let's have a conversation, not because we're interested in being acquired, but because we were thinking about raising a round. So if we're going to raise a round, why don't we have the conversation with you too? There might be something we can do here. I think for us, it was important for them to understand that we weren't selling. We were well capitalized. We didn't need to sell. And we were having this conversation because we liked them as partners potentially, and they were great companies. And we felt that having two interested parties mattered a lot versus just having one. Just this is advice we had gotten, just understood through our fundraising process as well. So all the ingredients were there, which is why we stepped into that process.
When you guys responded to the company who reached out, did you already know what is considered a good outcome for you guys? Or at that time you were not clear, you just want to chat?
Yeah, so the way that we thought about it, and again, in hindsight, it sounds like we were really thoughtful, but I would say at the time, a lot of it was like we were learning as we were going. I think the way that we thought about it was in 3 stages. I think the first stage was just like, look, it's okay to just have some conversations, but if you're going to really go through a process, there's this somewhat of like a boiling frog moment where like you've had enough conversations and like the water's boiling, like you have to make a decision. Otherwise, you're just wasting a bunch of time. You're distracting yourself. It just doesn't make sense. Stage 1, I think, was just my co-founder and I had to talk and be like, what are we trying to do here? What is our plan? What is a good outcome? Just like you said, Shayan. But we didn't really have a number that we were referencing super concretely in the beginning. I think we just started those conversations. And then there was a point when we transitioned to stage 2, which was like what we called like value maximization. So at the value maximization stage, we still didn't quite have a number, but we basically said our goal here is to maximize the value, whether it's fundraising, whether it's acquisition. There's a certain set of things we focused on to maximize value. And then the stage 3 was, okay, the decision. And that's when we were like, okay, we feel like we've maximized the value. You actually can feel as you turn down term sheets and the term sheets start getting higher, you can feel yourself hitting a plateau in terms of like there's like a number that you're not going to cross. And that's when you start to make a decision. But I think there's a psychology here that's really interesting at the beginning of deciding that you're entering a process because you're committing to some degree that a part of you wants to have this conversation.
Ivan, I'd love to hear your take on this, but I think one of the best things that we did, and almost a trick that I like to tell other founders, is if you have a credible offer, like something on paper from an acquirer, take that to your most trusted VCs or the people that led your last round and ask them if they would give you a term sheet that would match that. Or if they wouldn't, what would they give you right now? What would they offer you? And that way you actually have a fallback option. If you enter that deal process and you get 30 or 60 days into it and it falls through, you know that your VCs are behind you and you know what your fallback option is in terms of the valuation. But it also tells you what they think the value actually is, because oftentimes they say maybe don't sell, keep building, we think you can get bigger, and you have to put a stake in the ground and say what's the actual number that you'd be willing to finance at today. And if it's lower than where the acquisition offers that, then that gives you some food for thought in terms of what the difference is. And it also gives you a backup plan. If the M&A doesn't go through, you can maybe supercharge your business with some extra capital. I love that. It feels like a win-win situation to do that.
Yeah, for sure. We totally agreed. I think that's actually if you have that, whether it's like an LOI or something that you can bring to investors, like 100% agreed. The kind of broader point that you're making, which I want to like just click on, is run a process, right? Like at some point you want to be actually thinking about the steps to take and not just playing these things by ear and having conversations and not being as thoughtful. You want to actually say, okay, there is a plan A, there's a plan B. If there is a terms on the table, like what do I do with that? And it sounds like you've advised and are advising founders. I would also recommend founders get people on their side that can help give them some of that perspective on what a process looks like for them, because it's very different in different situations.
Nick, you were mentioning that there was a price that the VC gives you and the price that acquirer gives you. I wonder, do you have a price that you yourself give you, like any price that you think is worthwhile for your time, or maybe you have to work for someone else now instead of being a boss yourself? What was the price for that?
That's a really thoughtful question. That there would be a difference between, because the market reality is that you're selling your shares. I heard one person say that the product that you have at a startup is not actually the product you're selling to customers, it's the shares of your company. And that's an interesting way to think about it. And who are the buyers of those? It's either the acquirer or someone who's financing you. And so if they're giving you two prices, you probably have a pretty good triangulation on what you're actually worth at that period of time, and whether I had an opinion higher or lower was somewhat irrelevant. At the end of the day, there are a lot of parties that you have to think about. You have to think about your early investors, you have to think about your institutional investors, think about your employees, early and later employees. Got to think about your co-founders, and just make sure that everyone's being taken care of by this path, and that you're maximizing as much as possible the outcome for each of them. Whether I assessed the company was higher or lower, I obviously wanted it to be higher, but there's a reality to it that comes to you, and that's what people are offering. And it ended up being very good enough, obviously, that we took it and we're very happy with it.
What about you, Ivan? Like, what's your thought if you want to sell or not? I'm more curious on how do you yourself make the decision, right? You could also maybe keep building, wait for a few years and raise a new round. Like, maybe the price is so good that you think, oh, this is just so good. So was that a situation for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like there's two questions here. It's like just question on price and then question on like how do we make that decision?
Yeah.
Just on the price front, like I want to just 100% like it's an auction, like it's a market auction. Like you're basically running a process where you're the auctioneer to some degree, but you're also the product in some ways, and you're basically going out and there's a bunch of different potential buyers, and it's a market clearing exercise. So on your personal decision, or at least ours, it was a very like sobering moment of realizing at least the conversation starts with the founders, and Nick's right. Like you think about everyone, and you have to take care of as many, if not everyone, that's been a part of this process and this journey of building the company. And I feel like investors would agree, like it comes down to, do you want to keep, as the founders, do the founders want to keep doing this, or do they want to sell, or what is it? What is the motivation? Where are you at in this process? What are you trying to do? And it's so specific to like the company and the stage and the product and you and your life circumstances. It's pretty hard to generalize, but I would say, I guess when I work with founders that go through this, my first piece of kind of feedback to them is always get your head straight, know how you're thinking about this as much as you can, because once you introduce a bunch of other variables in ingredients, it starts to become hard to know where your foundation is for making this decision. And for us, I think it was like recognizing that I'm gonna talk in generalities now, just because I think it's hard. Again, everybody's case is specific, so it's very hard to just. So consumer products are very freaking hard to build. Consumer products are fairly binary. Consumer products are very different from software as a service or enterprise products, where for a consumer product, there are very few successful $30 million to $100 million consumer products. You're generally either a zero or you're something big at some point. And when we thought about it, it was in consumer in general, it's okay, do we have a path to something that's actually going to be really big? And that answering that's a very hard kind of the question, but that was one thing that we thought about a lot, is do we have a path? And then the second is, do we want to build the thing that we believe we would have to build to get there, right? And do we want to invest the time it's gonna take to do that? And then you weigh that against, where are we today? What is the value that we've created today? And what is the best way to capture that value? And value is this kind of loaded term that has a bunch of stuff here, which is whether it's monetary, it's your own reputation, it's return to your team, to your investors. And so you just balance those two things and you end up landing on an answer usually when you go through that. And then there's a personal element to that. My wife, my co-founder's wife, and us thinking about life things like starting a family or whatever, those things matter. They matter a ton. Have all those elements. Yeah.
I still remember so clearly being at the kitchen table, talking about it with my wife, and she just put it so clearly, said, we need to use the Jeff Bezos regret minimization framework. I said, what are you talking about? She said, the regret minimization, don't you remember where he's like nerdy 30 years ago and he talked about his little regret minimization framework? I said, oh yeah, I remember that. And she said, okay, so draw it out. You're 5 years from now. Draw out the two outcomes in your quadrants. One is company succeeds. The other is company goes to zero, and go backwards from there. Well, how do you feel 5 years from now? Your company succeeds. Okay, now the company fails 5 years from now. How do you feel? And then go back from there and try to make a decision today. I'm driven a lot by, and I always have been, this giant, just having a life that matters, desire to make a difference, and trying to assess not only the financials here, how does this impact our chance to make a dent in the world? How does this impact our chance to, over the course of my lifetime, to have a lifetime that really matters and is meaningful? And so that's my regret minimization framework. We decide, okay, we're not going to keep going back and forth, because in the throes of the negotiation, it's very easy to go one way or the other. Say, okay, this is very good, we got to take it, or they're not respecting us, they're not giving us the price that we want here, they're not giving us the terms that we want, we've got to walk away. And if you just have clarity on 5 or 10 years from now, what's going to probably matter to you in this moment, and just act with that regret minimization framework, that's hugely clarifying if you're able to do that.
How long was the negotiation process for you guys from the companies reaching out to actually like signing a deal?
For us, from the first time we ever met them to the time the deal closed was about 6 months. And we did a paid proof of concept during that time, where they were able to kick the tires on the software, and we were entertaining them being a customer of ours during that process, and included going back and forth on the details of the LOI, the letter of intent, which is a summary of what the deal should look like. And then by the time we actually got to closing, we had quite a compressed, just 30-day closing period, where we just went through the very final due diligence and closing matters.
Yeah, very similar for us. Very similar. And that kind of time frame at the end of the diligence was also very similar. It's like you've signed the term sheet. That's when you go through everything, and you're just, all the I's have to be dotted, all the T's have to be crossed. You're dealing with all your bank accounts, you're dealing with all your legal entities, all that stuff. But yeah, from start to getting to that point, I think we were a little bit shorter. It was about 4 months, but it was very similar. The negotiation itself was like 3-4 months to get to a term sheet. And you're doing this, at least we did, with multiple parties. So you're parallel tracking. And then after the term sheet, there was still like at least like 2-3 weeks of you negotiate the term sheet. You go back and forth on it. And then there's a point when you actually sign it. And that's when you go into exclusivity to do deeper diligence. And then there's actually a definitive agreement that comes after the term sheet. And the definitive agreement is the actual, like, hey, this is happening, really doing it. Because at the term sheet, you can still walk away, or they can walk away. And yeah, so post the definitive agreement is when you're actually closing. And then it's the logistics of closing at that point, which is like, in our case, I think created like I forgot the term, but just like an entity to absorb our company, and our company kind of lives under, there's like all M&A, there's like a logistical side to how it happens. Everything is negotiable, or many things are negotiable. We started pretty soon. We were literally like, they wanted us to start right away. So I think, at least for us, it was really fast. Like within weeks or less, that it was like 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks off. That was it.
Exactly the same. It was almost immediate. Get your things in order and then get ready for the next journey. I just was going to comment that during this process, to understand how the mood and how the waves are going, as a startup, your maximum point of leverage is really before you sign the term sheet. Because once you go into
exclusivity,
typically whatever you sign there is as good as it's going to get. And things just degrade, and you get negotiated down, and you lose power after you sign that. So whatever you're signing, that few pieces of paper, term sheet, LOI, that's really should be in your mind enough to carry you through the difficulty of all of the work of that due diligence and all of those checklists, and the potential that they could walk away at any point to carry you through. And likewise, it's not just the company that's acquiring you, it's really an individual, typically chief product officer or a GM or the CEO of the company, who is your champion, who's over there banging the table and saying, we have to go through with this, and creating the momentum on the other side. And that's really what's important before you sign that letter of intent, that you've developed a relationship and that they feel rock solid and very comfortable defending that this is a good acquisition to go through with, because there are so many bumps during that final period that you really need the momentum and the goodwill and the trust to be built before, so that you can get through all of those final negotiations and little bits and pieces to actually make it over the finish line.
Sounds like anybody can walk away from the offer, even after they give you a term sheet, they can still walk away. So then what was your thinking from a running company perspective? Do you have to keep running your business? Like, what was your thought? And does your team know? What was the dynamic here?
Yeah, we tried to not be distracted by the process as much as possible. It was essentially my work stream at our company, and my co-founder also, and we pulled in other people as needed, but as little as possible. Because if it does fall through, you don't want to wake up and find that you've lost 30 or 60 days on something that didn't matter. You still have to be building there during that time. You still have to be serving customers during that time period, not being distracted, segmenting it off, and just not even really talking about it with the rest of the company. I think that's generally good advice, is to, until something's really closed and definitive, not really be talking that openly or publicly about venture and M&A, because at any point it could go a different direction. You want to be transparent with the company, but I find that it's overall just distracting.
It was exactly the same for me. Like, I was the primary owner of the workflow. No one knew until beyond when we were fairly certain like it was going to happen. And we only we shared it with the team at the point that we had to bring the team into the process. That was the only point. There was no like pre-announcement of it or getting people's thoughts. Unfortunately, actually, that was one of the hard things, is you're actually moving through this process and you're not consulting the people where it would affect as well. But it was just myself, my co-founder would come in and be brought in on occasion. Yeah.
I would say one of the challenging pieces of that was towards the very end. So it's maybe 2 weeks before the entire thing closed. So before the money was wired out and the very definitive close to the whole transaction, they wanted to interview each and every member of our team. And we pushed back really hard against that. And in the end, we couldn't really get around it and let the acquiring company talk to every single person. But that's really challenging position as a founder to be in, because you're letting the people that you love on your team feels like a little bit interrogated, but also be sold a vision to. And so they start, either they don't like it, which is not good because you want your team, if that's the direction you're going in, to like it and have a positive integration experience, or they get sold on it. And then if it doesn't go through, they're upset, or they think, oh, it could have been better. So that really is challenging when you get to the stage where they want to meet a lot of, not just key people, they wanted to meet every single person in our company. And that was challenging to give into that, but fortunately it worked out in the end.
Yeah, it was actually the same for us too. Just adding, that was actually the moment that we let people know. It was, I think, a week before they wanted to do the interviews or the conversations. And that was the point. We just said, hey, just share the news. And then it was like, hey, for the next week, 1, you're going to schedule a time. 2, start preparing and like let's do it together. There's no other way to get around this. And same thing though, fortunately it worked out.
I personally sat in each of those interviews just to make sure that they went smoothly and all the questions were fair and things like that. So we didn't just send in the employees and say good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we also back channeled, and we made sure we did our best to negotiate down and soften the actual process itself. It became a leveling interview versus a binary yes or no about the person. There's a lot of nuance actually to maximizing the chance of a positive outcome in each of these steps.
Let's talk about your life now. First of all, are you like rich that you never need to work again?
I'll just say definitely not never need to work again, because I think there is, I don't know, maybe it's a personal thing of just, it was never about the money anyways. There's a baseline. I'll be honest though, there's a baseline level of comfort and stability, I think is the right word actually, that you have after this. I don't think it's changed the psychology around working or not working for me personally.
Okay. How about you, Nick?
Yeah, I agree. It hasn't changed the psychology of work. I think that's a really good way to put it. I think it gives me, if I need to take gaps in my career, or if I'm in a situation where it's not working out for some reason, I appreciate that you have that cushion behind you where you feel like you don't need to take a job or put up with something just for the money. That's something that's really great about being through the first exit. But what drives me is that life of meaning and making an impact, and able to do that through angel investing and helping other founders. And the ultimate commitment is co-founding again. That's the ultimate way to just co-founding in general again. It's one thing to make an angel investment in someone. It's another to say, I want to actually build this with you, is what I'm saying. A different level of commitment. But I found a great way to be able to take advantage of the skill set that I've built here, and be able to still be out there in the ecosystem and helping other folks.
You guys are still working in the company that acquired you. What is the current experience like for you guys? How long have you been here? What do you do now?
I just moved over to working in LiveRamp Ventures, which is really fun. So they just spun up a venture capital group within in corporate development. So I still get to work with founders and help out with a few other people that have been acquired by LiveRamp, the CEOs of those companies. It's cool. It's cool to be at a big company and be able to still work with small companies. I think it's a pretty unique experience. And before that, I was able to learn a lot from working at a larger company, working in business development and operations and or within a larger organization. You can get those best practices and think about, if my next company gets to this size, like how do I want to be running it and how do I want to think about problems of a more scaled organization.
Yeah, pretty cool to hear that you're on the venture side, because I think that's like a unique opportunity actually at a big company, is that you can work on different things. There's an or like pathways to grow or shift, which at a startup or even your company, like you're all in 99% of the time. Yeah. Similarly, we integrated like both our team and brought elements of our product over. But over the last 2 years, I joined as a product manager and focused on product. And over the last 2 years, have expanded the surface of product that I cover, going from our primary piece to our game platform, our shared services, our data team, and the social group that originally joined. Stayed still in the same function, but just covering a larger part of the company. And yeah, I've built a team of product managers and managers now that are great, and learned a lot, like what Nick said, of you get a chance to see this hypothetical, like what would it have been like if my company had reached this scale? My team now is hundreds of people, so I get to take those lessons into the next company. What would it be like to scale a product and design organization to that level? So yeah, 2 years in, definitely a lot of positive, I would say, of being at the company still.
So I'm kind of curious, like now at this life stage, like what? I mean, maybe okay. So maybe you're still in the company. Seems like you like it. Maybe eventually you'll probably do next things. Like, what will be the next ideal thing look like? Would you still be running companies again, going back to zero, or now you want something different?
I feel like having your first acquisition or your first exit sets the baseline, I think, of what your resources or your ability to do something, to execute a little bit higher than it had been before. So it expanded my perspective of, hey, what do I want to do next? It could range from taking a year off and just working on projects that have no intention of being venture backed and are just fun, to, hey, I want to go and build a team and tackle some of the hardest problems in the world and raise a $50 million round off the bat. Like, the range and the opportunities were so much wider that I actually think I went through a phase that I'm actually probably still in the phase, to be honest, of losing my focus. I felt like I was actually a lot more focused before when I had limited options. And this has given me this really frustrating position of being like, I actually don't know. And I expect that at some point it's gonna find back down into something focused. But I just wanted to share that candidly, like after an acquisition, that kind of funnel opens in a way that I wouldn't have expected. And I recognize the need to close that back, maybe after a period of exploration.
Okay.
Yeah, taking it one day at a time, honestly, because you can make all kinds of plans in life and nothing's really for certain. My daily schedule typically involves some level of fitness and nutrition that I wasn't able to access when I was a founder, which is really nice actually, and really a luxury. It involves some level of upskilling and learning something and allowing me to read about or take a course or learn about something that I didn't know about before, and to talk to people and catch up with people that I've known from grad school at Harvard and Stanford or from other walks in life, or meet new people. And so through all of those, just getting a prepared mind for what might be a special opportunity. And I've been surprised through this angel investing and just keeping your eyes open, some of the amazing founders that you're able to see out there and what you can learn from them. So I'm still a little bit in the learning and exploring phase and thinking about exactly what can come next, but I'm enjoying it a lot. So not in a rush unless that opportunity that I'm looking for comes walking in the door. But when it does, I'll be ready for it.
It sounds like VC is getting more strict at fundraising, so maybe it's the new season of more M&A again, maybe next year. Some people are talking about it. What would be your advice for founders right now, given today's climate?
I was just going to add that there's something special that hasn't really happened before, which is that all of these companies SPAC'd and they raised huge amounts of cash, and they're going to be running out of cash, a lot of them, in the next 12 to 24 months. I saw an analysis of this, of how long a lot of them have before they run out. And so it's an opportunity for interesting consolidation, or maybe take privates or startup-y founders to take some of those companies that went public and do something with them once they're running out of cash or being broken up into pieces. But in the current economic climate, there are certainly going to be companies that are struggling and are going to be acquired. So that's sort of the season we're in right now. And if you're strong enough and producing results enough to be able to raise, it might not be at quite as lofty valuation as it was when interest rates were near zero a few years ago. So it's typically better for acquirers in the current environment than it is for the startup. So I would definitely see more tuck-ins, more acquihires, more acquisitions in the coming period. There are different situations you can find yourself in if you're not able to raise, or you're seeing that you're plateauing or your growth is slow. Typically, you're going to be selling at a little bit more of a discount than if someone approaches you proactively and says, we really want to buy your company, or we're very interested in the company, and you're able to sell at more of a premium when you have that cash in the bank and you don't need to sell, and it's them who's really doing the work and providing a premium to be able to buy. So those are very different situations. So the picture that we're painting is, it depends which camp your startup is. In either case, having some sort of relationships developed either with customers or with strategic partners is a good thing, because if they've known you for a few years, if you're making money with them, it develops a relationship and a trust, versus just showing up at the very end and getting involved in some sort of process with them. So the best thing you can do is just keep the relationships warm where possible, whether you need them or not.
People that buy companies, somebody who champions and makes it absolutely like relationship maintenance, and usually the best way to do it is to work on something together in some form. The worst is like every 3 months you just catch up on a call for some reason. It just doesn't usually build the relationship. And then I would just add the caveat of, for founders who are in the middle of everything right now, don't let it distract you. Your primary job is to build your company, to serve your customers, to motivate your team, to make sure you're well capitalized as much as you can. This is just kind of part of the job of being the founder, is to maintain those relationships in a real way. I'll add one more thing just a prediction, because I'm in the market today. That's crazy. I think there's this really interesting misalignment of like buyer and seller expectations that always happens at the beginning of a really strong shift in the market, where buyers are now expecting prices to be lower, and they're like, hey, we're going to acquire you. And sellers or founders are still expecting price. They still have the hangover from the last 2 years, 3 years. So there's still a mismatch, and someone has to capitulate, and it just depends on how long how sustained kind of shift is, right? If we're in a downturn for 2 years, however many years, at some point, usually the seller capitulates and the prices go down. Things flip back up, and so yeah, there's some type of like game theory calculus that you run in your head as you do this, but the market's going to follow that. And then the moment that you're going to see like a delay, I think, in things happening until the moment that converges, and then you're going to see an acceleration.
I'll also make a pitch that there was one book that I read that I found really helpful called Magic Box Paradigm. So we can put a link to it. I don't know, Ivan, if you ever read that, but
yeah,
I read as many things as possible and talked to the lawyers and whatnot. And that one book was the single best resource. You don't have to pick it up until you're actually going through M&A, but when you are, it's very useful.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.